She found out on a Thursday, which was an ordinary day in every other respect. The fire in the east sitting room had been lit before she came downstairs. The post had arrived and been sorted on the side table by the door. The cook had sent up the usual breakfast at the usual hour, and the morning light was coming through the windows in the particular way of November mornings that have not yet decided whether to commit to darkness or permit a version of gray that passes for light. Everything was as it always was. The house ran the way it had been running for 19 months, which was smoothly and without incident, and with the particular invisible competence of a household where someone has arranged things so that they do not require arranging, where the systems underneath the comfort are so well maintained that the comfort itself seems simply to exist, like weather, rather than to be made by anyone. She had been making it. She had been making it for 19 months, and this was a Thursday morning, and the post was sorted, and the fire was lit, and Mrs. Holt was standing in the doorway of the east sitting room with the expression of a woman who has prepared what she is about to say, and is not entirely certain it will land the way she has prepared it to land. She had thanked Mrs. Holt when it was over. She had said the words with the same composed warmth she brought to all exchanges with the staff, because whatever she was feeling in that moment was not something Mrs. Holt deserved to receive the weight of. What Mrs. Holt had told her, and in the careful and precisely neutral tone of a woman who has been managing the human interior of a household for 14 years and understands the difference between information that is merely useful and information that is necessary, was that His Grace had been in correspondence with Lord Ashmore regarding Lord Ashmore's daughter, and that the correspondence had the character of something at an advanced stage, and that she had believed her Grace had a right to know this before the stage advanced further. She stood in the east sitting room after Mrs. Holt withdrew, and she looked at the morning light on the grounds, and she let the information arrive completely in the way she had always let difficult things arrive, without resistance and without performance, simply allowing the full weight of it to settle before she decided what the weight required. The weight required a great deal. What it said, translated from the particular language of Mrs. Holt's careful neutrality into the language of actual fact, was this. She had been a temporary arrangement in a house she had spent 19 months making permanent. She had been a placeholder, a capable, attentive, genuinely invested placeholder, and the placeholder function was concluding, and she had not been informed because informing her had not apparently risen to the level of a priority in the management of a situation that she had been inside without understanding its nature. She had been the last to know. She had been kept comfortable enough that knowing had not seemed urgent. That was the shape of it. And it was. When she held it in the full light of Thursday morning, the most clarifying thing that had happened to her in 19 months. She was not angry. She waited for anger, and it did not come, not in the first hour, and not in the second. And by the time the third hour had passed, she understood that what had arrived instead of anger was something more useful, which was the specific and total clarity of a person who has been given, at some cost, an accurate picture of a situation they have been misreading and who now knows precisely what to do. She was going to leave. Not that day, not in the announced dramatic way of a woman making a statement. She was going to leave in the only way that suited her, which was completely and without performance, and before he had the opportunity to manage the leaving the way he had managed everything else, which was smoothly and at his own convenience and in a way that preserved his comfort at the expense of her dignity. She was going to be gone before he understood she was going, and she was going to take with her every quality she had brought to this house, and she was going to leave behind nothing except the evidence of what had been here, and she was going to do it all with the quiet efficiency of a woman who has been practicing this particular kind of competence for 19 months and is extremely good at it. This is that story. It is also the story of what he did when he found the evidence. And it is, in the end, the story of what it costs a man to understand the difference between what he had and what he lost, and whether that understanding, arrived at late and at real expense, is sufficient to build anything on. Subscribe to this channel now and turn on the bell, because this story has more in it than the leaving, and the more is the part that stays with you. Stay from the beginning. She had arrived at the arrangement through the usual mechanisms, which is to say, through the intersection of her family circumstances and his convenience, and the social architecture that turns both of those things into something that looks, from the outside, like a choice. She had made a choice. She wanted to be precise about that, even now, even on a Thursday morning when the choice was revealing dimensions she had not seen when she made it. She had chosen with clear eyes and accurate information, or with the information available to her at the time, which was that he was a man of considerable standing and evident intelligence, who required a certain kind of domestic and social management that she was exceptionally qualified to provide, and that the arrangement would give her a position and a household and a kind of authority over her own daily life that was not available to her through other means. She had not entered it expecting love. She was too practical for that, too clear-eyed about the landscape she was operating in, to have built her expectations around something that had not been offered. What she had expected was respect, and the particular form of respect that is expressed through genuine partnership, through being taken seriously, through the understanding that the person who manages a household and attends to its people and maintains its relationships with the world is a person whose contribution is real and whose judgment is worth consulting. She had not received that, not precisely. What she had received was a version of it that was, she understood now, carefully designed to feel like the real thing while being something considerably less. He had been considerate. He had been attentive in the surface ways, the social ways, the ways that are visible from across a room. He had introduced her correctly and consulted her on the dinner arrangements, and been seen to defer to her preferences on matters of household management. And all of this had the appearance of partnership, and had felt, in the 19 months of feeling it, only close enough to partnership that she had not pressed on the places where the appearance and the reality diverged. She had not pressed because pressing would have been uncomfortable, and the whole arrangement was organized, she understood now, around the avoidance of discomfort. His discomfort, specifically. She had been managing that without fully understanding she was managing it, had been arranging the household and the social calendar and the staff and the tenants and the 100 small things that make a house function in ways that never created friction, never produced situations he had to navigate, never made demands on him that exceeded what he was prepared to meet. She had been so good at it that he had not needed to notice her doing it, and he had not noticed, and the not noticing had extended to cover not only what she was doing, but who she was, and she had spent 19 months being quietly, consistently, professionally invisible in the house. She was quietly, consistently, professionally running. The invisibility had suited the arrangement. She saw that now with the particular and uncomfortable clarity of someone seeing a pattern they have been inside. The arrangement had not been built for permanence. It had been built for function, and she had made it function so well that the question of its permanence had not needed to be addressed, because the functioning had been sufficient for his purposes and had therefore never required examination. He had not examined it. He had not examined her. He had been for 19 months simply comfortable, and comfort, she was learning, was a thing that did not generate questions. Comfort simply continued until the more permanent version of comfort arrived, and then the temporary version was managed out with the same smooth efficiency that had characterized everything else. Lord Ashmore's daughter was the more permanent version. She had met Lord Ashmore's daughter once at the Pemberton Midsummer Gathering, and had found her pleasant and well presented and possessed of exactly the qualities that would suit a permanent arrangement with a man of his character, which was to say, she was decorative without being challenging, agreeable without being demanding, and possessed of a family name and a fortune that closed the negotiation before it had fully begun. She was not exceptional. She would not make the house more than it had been. She would not review the tenant accounts or notice the east corridor damp or spend 3 mornings finding the right solution for the cook's arithmetic problem or write the letters that kept the village school supplied. She would be managed around with the same smooth efficiency that she had been, and the house would function at a slightly lower register, and he would not notice the difference because he had not noticed the register she had brought it to. This was the thing she let herself feel, sitting in the east sitting room on Thursday morning, the one thing that was closest to the register of grief. Not the loss of what she had thought she had. She had made her peace with the nature of that loss before the hour was out. What she let herself feel was the particular and very specific grief of a person who has done excellent work in a room that will now be given to someone who will do it less well, and who understands that the room will not know the difference, and who knows the room better than anyone. She allowed that grief its full duration. Then she stood up, straightened her coat, and went to find her trunk. She packed it herself. This was a choice, not a necessity, and the choice was deliberate, because packing it herself meant she could control what left the house and what remained, and what she intended to leave behind was everything that had been hers in the sense of being purchased with his resources or provided as part of the arrangement, and what she intended to take was everything that had been hers before this house and would be hers after it, which was less than she might have hoped and more than she needed. The trunk was not large. It did not need to be. She had arrived here with more than she was leaving with in the material sense, but the material sense had never been the point, and what she was leaving with in the sense that mattered was the 19 months of proof that she was capable of far more than this house had required of her, and that proof did not fit in a trunk but traveled with her anyway, in the particular posture of a woman who has learned herself through the exercise of genuine capability and knows what she knows. She wrote one note, not to him, to Mrs. Holt, because Mrs. Holt had earned a direct communication, and because Mrs. Holt would need to understand the household arrangements for the period following her departure, and because she respected Mrs. Holt enough to give her the information she needed without making her extract it from a situation she had not created. The note to Mrs. Holt was practical and precise, and contained everything Mrs. Holt would need to manage the transition, and it was, she thought, the most considerate thing she had done that day, and the day had contained several considerate things. She did not write to him. There was nothing she wanted to say to him that could be said in a letter, and there was nothing she wanted to say to him that he was currently equipped to receive, and she was not going to waste precision on a man who had spent 19 months failing to be present enough to deserve it. She was, in this, not unkind. She was simply accurate. She left on a Friday morning before the house was properly awake, which was the only time she had reliably to herself the window between Mrs. Holt's early rising and the rest of the staff's morning circulation, and she carried the trunk herself to the side door where the carriage she had arranged the previous afternoon was waiting, and she loaded it with the same quiet competence she brought to everything, and she rode away from the house without looking back at it, because she had been looking at it forward-facing for 19 months, and she had seen everything there was to see. She looked at the road ahead instead, and the road was gray and cold and entirely clear, and the carriage moved through it at a steady pace, and she sat with her hands in her lap and her spine straight, and the particular quality of a woman who has made a decision and is inhabiting it fully. And she was for the first time in a very long time, simply and completely herself. He did not discover she was gone until late morning. This was not because he was indifferent to her whereabouts, or not only because of that, but because their mornings had a structure that did not typically require them to intersect before 11, and the structure had been designed, as everything in that house had been designed, for his comfort, which meant that she appeared when it was convenient for her to appear and was otherwise understood to be occupied with the management of things that did not require his awareness. He came downstairs at 10 and had his breakfast and read his correspondence and was, by any external measure, entirely at ease in his morning, and it was only when he went to ask her something about the afternoon arrangements that Mrs. Holt intercepted him in the corridor with the expression of a woman carrying information she has been holding since early morning and is relieved to be delivering. Mrs. Holt gave him the note, not the note addressed to him, because there was no such note. The note addressed to herself, which she placed in his hands with the careful neutrality of a woman who understands that the contents are not technically her communication to make, but that the situation has produced no alternative. He read it. He read it twice. He stood in the corridor, and he was very still in the way of a man who has received information that does not fit any of the categories he has prepared for information to arrive in, and Mrs. Holt stood at a respectful distance and waited with the patience of a woman who has been in this household for 14 years and has seen a great many things require absorbing, and has learned that absorption cannot be hurried. He asked where she had gone. Mrs. Holt said she had not been informed of the specific destination and that she did not believe the information had been omitted accidentally. He received this with the expression of a man recognizing a precision he should have anticipated. He asked when she had left. Mrs. Holt said she believed it had been early morning. He asked if she had said anything before leaving, anything beyond the note. Mrs. Holt said she had not, and that her Grace had been composed and purposeful and had carried her own trunk to the side door, which she said in the particular tone of a woman inserting a detail she considers significant and expects to be understood as such. He understood it as such. He stood in the corridor for a long time after Mrs. Holt withdrew, and the house was quiet around him in the way that houses become quiet when something essential has been removed from them, not the quiet of peace, but the quiet of absence, the particular acoustic of a space that is missing something it did not know it needed until the something was gone. The quiet was instructive. He was not a man who had spent much time with instructive quiet, because his life had been organized, by him and by others, and most recently by her, around the elimination of conditions that produced it. He stood in it now without the usual mechanisms for its elimination, and it was, he was finding, a considerably louder than it appeared. Lord Fenwick came for dinner on a Saturday, which was a standing arrangement of several years, and which he had considered canceling, and had ultimately not cancelled, because canceling would have required an explanation he was not yet prepared to offer. Fenwick was not a man who required explanations precisely, but he was a man who noticed their absence and drew accurate conclusions from it, and an unexplained cancellation would have produced conclusions he was not ready to have drawn. He arrived, and the dinner was served, and the dining room had the quality that the dining room now had at every meal, which was a quality that was difficult to name and impossible to ignore, the quality of a room that has been set and served and maintained at a standard that no one currently present has established or is capable of maintaining, the lingering evidence of a competence that is no longer there. Fenwick noticed. He noticed in the way Fenwick noticed everything, which was immediately and without comment, filing the observation for deployment at the moment of his own choosing. He waited until the second course before he said anything, and what he said was not about her directly, which was the Fenwick method, the approach of a man who believes that the most useful observations arrive obliquely. He said that the lamb was excellent. He said it in the particular tone of a man noting the presence of a quality he had come to associate with a specific set of arrangements that were apparently still in effect, despite certain evidence to the contrary. He did not say what the evidence to the contrary was. He did not need to. She had not been at the dinner table. She had not been at the dinner table the previous Saturday either, which Fenwick had also noted, also without comment. Two absences of that kind, in a household where her presence had been as reliable as the season's furniture, were not accidental. Fenwick set down his fork. He said, without preamble, that he assumed the matter of Lord Ashmore had reached a conclusion. He did not ask it as a question, because it was not a question, and he was not going to pretend it was. He received this with the expression of a man who was discovering that information he believed was private was not as private as he had assumed, and that the discovery was its own kind of instruction. He said that it had not reached a conclusion. He said it accurately, which was the only register available when speaking to Fenwick, because Fenwick could hear inaccuracy the way other men heard out-of-tune instruments, immediately and with displeasure. Fenwick said that he had heard otherwise. He said that Lord Ashmore was understood to be expecting a communication, and that the absence of the communication had generated a particular quality of expectation in Lord Ashmore's household, and that Ashmore was not a man who maintained that quality of expectation without foundation. He said he had not sent a communication. Fenwick looked at him for a long moment with the expression of a man deciding how much of what he actually knew to deploy. And then he said, in the plainest register available to him, that he would like to understand what had happened, and that he was asking not because he was owed the information, but because he had known him for 20 years, and believed that whatever had happened in the past week was the kind of thing that benefited from being said aloud to someone capable of receiving it. He told Fenwick. He told it in the honest and slightly effortful way of a man who has not previously been required to account for his own behavior to anyone who expected actual accounting, and Fenwick listened to it without interruption, which was the discipline of a man who understood that interruption at certain points in a conversation prevents the speaker from arriving at the thing they most need to say. When it was finished, Fenwick was quiet for a moment. Then he said, with the economy of a man who has selected the most accurate sentence from several available options, that what he was describing was not a situation in which a woman had left. It was a situation in which a woman had been given sufficient information to understand a situation she had been inside without accurate information, and had responded to the accurate information in the only way that suited her, which was by removing herself before the accurate information was acted upon by someone else. He said that he understood that. Fenwick said he was not certain he did. He said that understanding it intellectually and understanding what it disclosed about his own conduct were two different things, and that the second understanding was the one that was going to be required if anything useful was going to happen from this point forward, and that the second understanding was harder and could not be arrived at in a dinner conversation, but that he recommended arriving at it before too much time elapsed, because certain windows had a tendency to close. He received the dinner after that in a silence that Fenwick respected without filling, which was the particular grace of a man who understood that some silences are not vacuums to be filled, but work being done. The work being done in that silence was the work of a man arriving, at some cost, and without the usual exits, at an honest picture of himself. It was not a flattering picture. It was the picture of a man who had organized 19 months of another person's life around his own comfort without examining what the organization was costing her, who had accepted the quality of her attention and the competence of her management, and the particular warmth she had brought to every room she occupied, and had received all of it as the natural condition of his environment, rather than as the continuous and genuine investment of a specific person who had been choosing every day of those 19 months to be there. She had been choosing, he had been assuming, and the difference between those two things was, he was finding, considerably larger than he had understood it to be when the difference had not yet been made visible. He began to understand the scope of it through the house. This was how it arrived, not through a single reckoning, but through the rooms themselves, which disclosed the nature of her contribution in the specific and undeniable language of its absence. The East Corridor had developed a damp problem that Aldous mentioned on Tuesday. Not a new problem, Aldous said, but one that had been managed, and that the management appeared to have been discontinued. He had not known there was a damp problem. He had not known it was being managed. The tenant at the northern boundary sent a letter on Wednesday, requesting a response to an earlier letter, a letter he could not locate in his correspondence, because the earlier correspondence had apparently been passing through a channel that no longer existed. Mrs. Holt came to him on Thursday with the kitchen accounts in a state that Mrs. Holt described with visible reluctance, as requiring attention, and which he spent an hour with before understanding that the accounts were not wrong, but that they were missing the layer of interpretation that made them useful, the layer that transformed figures into information, and that the layer had been provided, consistently, by someone who was no longer providing it. The village school wrote on Friday. The letter was polite and somewhat urgent, and referred to a supply arrangement that had apparently been agreed upon and that had recently stopped functioning, and that the head teacher hoped could be resumed at his Grace's earliest convenience. He did not know about the supply arrangement. He had not known it existed. He sat with the village school letter for a long time on Friday afternoon, and he thought about what the letter represented, which was one thread in a web of relationships and arrangements and ongoing managements that had been maintained invisibly and without acknowledgment by a person he had been allowing to be invisible. And he thought about how many such threads there were, and how many he would discover in the coming weeks. And he thought about the word allowing, and about whether allowing was the accurate word, and whether the accurate word was something more deliberate, and therefore more damning. He went to Fenwick again on a Monday. He went because Fenwick was the only person in his life who would tell him what he needed to hear rather than what he wanted to hear, and what he needed to hear was something he could not yet construct for himself. He laid out what the week had produced, the damp and the tenant and the kitchen accounts and the village school, and Fenwick listened to all of it with the same patience he had brought to the dinner. And when it was finished, he said only that it seemed the week had been productive in the informational sense, and that the information appeared to be converging on a particular understanding, and that he would like to know what that understanding was. He said that the understanding was that she had been doing a great deal more than he had known she was doing, and that the great deal more had not been an accident or an overflow of capability, but a sustained and serious contribution to a household that he had been treating as simply running well, without asking why it ran well or what it was costing anyone for it to do so. Fenwick said that was one layer of the understanding. He asked what the other layers were. He was quiet for a long moment. He said that the other layers were harder to state, and that stating them required him to say things about himself that were not comfortable, and that he was going to say them anyway, because he had been comfortable for too long, and comfort had cost him something he had not understood was valuable until it was gone. He said that he had spent 19 months treating a person as a function, not deliberately, not with the intention of reducing her to usefulness, but in the effective sense, in the sense that mattered, in the sense that she would have experienced it. He had related to her primarily in terms of what she provided rather than who she was, and he had organized the arrangement around the continuation of what she provided without once examining what she was, or what she wanted, or what she understood the arrangement to be. He said he had known about Lord Ashmore's daughter. He said it plainly, because plainly was the only honest register, and he was trying, in this office, in this conversation, to operate in the honest register throughout. He said he had been in correspondence with Ashmore, and that the correspondence had not yet produced a commitment, but that it had been heading in the direction of one, and that he had not informed her of it, and that his reason for not informing her had been, when he looked at it honestly, the reason of a man who does not want to have a conversation that will require him to make a decision. He had been avoiding the decision by avoiding the conversation, and she had found out through other means, and she had made the decision he had been avoiding. And the decision she had made was the accurate one given the information available to her, and he could not in any honesty argue with it. Fenwick said nothing for a long moment. Then he said that he appreciated the honesty, and that it had clearly cost something, and that the cost was appropriate given what had been spent by someone else over 19 months without acknowledgment. He said he wanted to find her. Fenwick said he had assumed as much. He said he wanted to know if Fenwick thought there was anything worth finding, meaning whether there was anything left in the situation that could be approached rather than simply closed, or whether the closing was complete, and he was now simply managing his own discomfort in the language of wanting to find her. Fenwick considered this. He said that was an honest question and deserved an honest answer, and that the honest answer was that he did not know, and that not knowing was the accurate position, and that the only way to arrive at a more certain position was to find her and ask, and that the asking would need to be done with the understanding that the answer might be no, and that no was a complete sentence that would not benefit from argument. He said he understood. He found her through means he was not entirely proud of, which involved a conversation with Mrs. Holt that produced, after a considerable pause, the name of her cousin in the East County, and a subsequent inquiry through channels that he would have preferred not to use, and which produced, on a Wednesday afternoon 2 weeks after she had left, an address. He wrote before he went. He did not go without writing, because going without writing was the action of a man who believes that his physical presence is the most powerful argument available, and he was trying to stop believing that his presence was the argument, and to understand instead that what was required was the truth said plainly, and that the truth said plainly was better given a letter's lead time than delivered in person where it could be received as pressure. The letter took 3 drafts. The first was too managed, too oriented toward a resolution that served him. The second was better, but still carried in its construction the faint architecture of a man explaining himself in ways designed to produce a particular response. The third was the one he sent, and what the third said was this. He said he had spent the 2 weeks since her departure accounting for himself, and that the accounting had been thorough and had not produced a flattering picture, and that he was not writing to argue with the picture, but to describe it accurately, because she deserved accuracy from him, even if she had not received it in the arrangement itself. He said he had been treating her as a function for 19 months, not with deliberate intent, but in the effective sense that was the only sense that mattered, and that the arrangement had been designed by his own choices, conscious and otherwise, in ways that had made her invisible to him, even as she was making everything visible to everyone else. He said he had known about Lord Ashmore's daughter and had not told her, and that the reason he had not told her was the reason of a man who avoids decisions by avoiding the conversations that require them, and that he understood this was the specific failure at the center of everything else. He said he was not asking for anything in particular. He was asking her to know that he had understood what had happened and what he had contributed to it, and that the understanding was not comfortable, and he was not trying to make it comfortable, and that if there was any possibility that she was willing to have a conversation, he would like to have it on whatever terms she was willing to name. He sent it, and he waited. The waiting was 7 days, and they were, without question, the most demanding 7 days of recent memory. And not because anything happened in them, but because nothing happened in them except his own continued reckoning with the picture he had produced, which did not improve with proximity. He was not practiced at sitting with pictures of himself that did not improve with proximity. He had organized his life. He was understanding around the prevention of such pictures, and the prevention had worked very well until it had produced exactly the conditions that had made her leaving inevitable, and the circle of that was not lost on him. Her reply came on a Tuesday. It was not long. It said that she had received his letter and had read it more than once, and that she found it more honest than she had expected, and that she was not using expected in the pejorative sense, but in the sense of what the available evidence had led her to anticipate, and that the gap between what she had anticipated and what she had received was itself informative. She said the accounting he had described was accurate. She said she had not left in anger, which she wanted him to understand, not because she was interested in his comfort on the point, but because accuracy mattered to her. And the accurate statement of her state when she left was not anger, but clarity. And clarity was a condition she had been trying to reach for a long time and had finally reached, and she was not willing to return to the conditions that had made clarity unavailable. She said she was willing to have a conversation. She said it with the particular precision of someone who wanted the willingness received as what it was, which was exactly that, and not more. Not permission, and not forgiveness, and not the return of anything that had been in place before, but the willingness of a person who had decided that the letter was honest enough to deserve a response that was also honest, and that honesty in response to honesty was the minimum that the situation warranted. She said she would be at the east garden of her cousin's house on Saturday morning, and that if he came, she would speak with him, and that she had chosen the east garden because it was outside, and because outside was the right register for a conversation that was going to require both of them to be in the open air of what they actually were saying, rather than the managed atmosphere of a room. He came on Saturday. He arrived at the gate of the east garden at 10 in the morning, which was the time she had not specified, but which felt correct for a conversation of this nature. And she was there, standing near the far wall, with her coat against the November wind, attending to something in the dormant beds, with the focused and unhurried quality she brought to everything, the quality that he had been in the presence of for 19 months, without understanding that it was a choice she was making rather than a condition of the environment. She heard the gate, and she turned. She did not come toward him, and she did not retreat. She waited, which was her way with things that deserved precision, and he crossed the garden toward her with the particular care of a man who has understood that he does not have the right to assume anything about how this is going to go, and has decided to let it go the way it goes. He said her name when he reached her, not a title, her name, which was a different thing, and which cost him something to say in that register, the register of genuine address rather than social convention. And she received it without performing warmth or coldness, but simply as information about where he was beginning. She said he had come. He said he had. She looked at him for a long moment with the clear and steady attention that had always been her way of looking at things that required accuracy, and he held the look without the usual management, without the composure that composure had cost him for years, simply as a man standing in a November garden accountable to someone who had every right to find him insufficient. He said he had been thinking about what to say, and had arrived at the conclusion that the most honest version of what he wanted to say was also the simplest, and that the simplest version was that he had understood in the weeks since she had left the difference between having something and valuing it, and that he had had her for 19 months and had not valued her in the way that valuing requires, which was not simply appreciating what someone provides, but being present to who they are, and that he had not been present to who she was, and that the absence of that presence had produced the conditions she had left, and he understood why she had left them. She was quiet for a moment. She said she appreciated the honesty and that she was going to be honest in return, which was that she had not left because she had stopped believing there was anything real in the arrangement. She had left because she had finally received accurate information about what the arrangement was, and accurate information had told her that what she had believed was real was not the whole of the picture, and that the part of the picture she had not been shown was the part that made the rest of it unacceptable. He said he understood that. She said she wanted to know something, and that she wanted a true answer rather than a considered one, and that if the true answer required a moment, she would wait for it. He said he would give her a true answer. She said she wanted to know whether the correspondence with Lord Ashmore had been because he wanted what Lord Ashmore's daughter offered, or whether it had been because he had not yet understood what he had, and had been moving, in the absence of that understanding, in the direction that his life had always moved, which was toward the option that required the least examination. He was quiet for longer than a moment. She waited. He said it had been the second. He said it in the particular way of a man saying something he has known for some time and has not previously been willing to say, and the saying of it had the quality of something releasing rather than being placed, the quality of a statement that was true before it was spoken, and is simply more fully itself in the speaking. She looked at him. He said he had been moving toward Lord Ashmore's daughter the way he moved toward everything, which was with the smooth efficiency of a man who has organized his life so that the next step is always already prepared, and that she had been in his life for 19 months as the thing that made the current step function well, and that he had not understood until the step changed that she was not a step. She said she needed to understand what he was saying. He said he was saying that he had understood in the weeks of her absence that what he had been managing around her was not an arrangement. It was her specifically, and the loss of her specifically, and that the loss had produced a quality of recognition that the presence had not, which was the particular and unearned irony of a man who needed to lose something to understand what it was. She said that irony was not lost on her either. He said he imagined it was not. She looked at the garden for a moment. She said she was going to tell him something, and that she wanted him to receive it as information rather than as a door, because she was not yet certain what it was the door to, and she needed him to understand the difference between information and an opening before she said it. He said he understood. She said she had not left certain things behind in the house because she had no more use for them. She had left them because they had not been hers in the sense that mattered, and the things that were hers in the sense that mattered she had taken with her. And among the things that were hers in the sense that mattered was the understanding of what that house could be, and what the people in it could be to each other, if both people were present in it in the way that presence actually required. And she had been present in that way for 19 months, and she was not prepared to return to being present in a way that was not reciprocated. She said she was telling him this not because she had decided anything, but because he had asked for honesty, and this was the honest territory. And if he was going to say anything further, it needed to be said in the full understanding of what she had just said. He said he wanted to say something further. She said she was listening. He said that he was not going to ask her to return. He said it in the specific way of a man drawing a distinction that mattered to him. And she heard the distinction, which was that he was not going to ask her to return to what they had been, because what they had been was a specific set of conditions that had produced a Thursday morning and a packed trunk and a carriage in the November dark. And those conditions were not what he was asking her to return to. He said he was asking something different, which was whether she was willing to allow him to demonstrate over time and in practice, rather than in a conversation in a November garden, that he had understood what presence actually required, and that he was prepared to provide it, and that the providing would not be the managed version of it, the version designed to produce a particular response, but the actual version, the version that required him to be present to who she was rather than to what she provided, and that he understood the difference and intended to honor it. She was quiet for a long time, and the garden was cold, and the November light was flat, and somewhere at the edge of the grounds a bird was moving through a bare hedge with more purpose than the hedge seemed to warrant, and she watched it for a moment before she looked back at him. She said she was going to be at the Fenwick gathering on the second Thursday of December, and that she was going to be there because Lady Fenwick had invited her, and because she had accepted the invitation before any of this had occurred, and that she was not going to adjust her attendance on account of any of it. He said he understood. She said that if he was also at the Fenwick gathering on the second Thursday of December, and if he conducted himself in the way that a man who had understood what he claimed to have understood would conduct himself in a room and she would have an answer to his question. She said she was not telling him what that answer would be, because she did not know yet, and she was not going to perform a knowledge she did not have. She was simply telling him where she would be and what she would be watching for, and that the watching was not a test and was not a performance, and was simply the honest practice of a woman who had learned over 19 months to pay very close attention to the difference between what people said and what they did. He said he would be there. She said she expected he would. She turned back to the garden then, not coldly, not as a dismissal, but with the unhurried quality of a woman who has said what she needed to say and is returning to what she was doing before he arrived. And he stood in the November cold for a moment, and then he turned and crossed the garden and went through the gate, and the gate closed behind him, and she remained at the far wall, and she did not watch him go. The Fenwick gathering was on a Thursday evening in early December, and the house was lit, and the rooms were warm, and there were perhaps 30 guests arranged through the various spaces of a house that understood how to contain a gathering without overwhelming it. And she arrived at 7 in a coat she had chosen because it suited her, and for no other reason, with the composed and entirely self-contained quality of a woman who has decided to be where she is and requires nothing from the room to confirm the decision. He was there. He arrived 20 minutes after she did, which she knew without having been watching for him. The way you know certain things in rooms when your attention is finely calibrated. She did not cross to him. She did not alter her position or her conversation or the quality of her presence in the room. She simply continued being where she was, attending to the conversation she was having with Lady Fenwick about the new library catalogue at the lending institution, which was a conversation she was genuinely enjoying, and she allowed the room to arrange itself around the fact of both of them being in it. He did not come to her immediately either. She was aware of him moving through the room, speaking to Lord Harwick, and to Fenwick himself, and to two men she did not recognize, and she was aware that his movement had the quality she had been watching for, which was not the smooth social efficiency of a man working a room, but something more deliberate, more careful, the movement of a man paying attention to where he is rather than executing a familiar sequence. He came to her side of the room at approximately 8, which was natural enough in the course of the evening circulation, and he joined the conversation she was in not by redirecting it toward himself, but by listening first, which was a thing she noted, and then by contributing to it in a way that was responsive to what had been said before his arrival, rather than replacing it with his own agenda. Lady Fenwick watched all of this with the particular quality of attention of a woman who has been told the relevant history and is now observing the evidence. And she withdrew from the conversation at a natural pause with the grace of someone who knows when her presence is no longer the most useful thing in a room. He and she were standing near the east window, which she had not arranged, and he had not arranged, and the conversation moved from the library catalogue to something else, and then to something else, and the quality of the movement was different from anything she had experienced in 19 months of conversations with him, which was the quality of genuine exchange, of two people responding to each other rather than one person managing the conversation and the other person being managed. He asked her a question about something she had said earlier in the evening, a comment she had made to Lady Fenwick about the relationship between institutional lending and the democratization of knowledge. And the question was specific enough to tell her that he had been listening before he joined the conversation, which was the first thing she had told him she would be watching for, which was not announced, and was not a performance, and was simply him doing what he had said he would do, which was be present to who she was. She answered the question. He listened to the answer in the particular way she recognized, the way that meant the listening was real, not the listening of a man waiting for his turn, but the listening of someone for whom what she was saying was the actual point. They spoke for 40 minutes, not with the managed ease of two people performing connection, but with the particular quality of a genuine conversation between two people who are both bringing their actual intelligence to bear on what the other person is saying. And the quality was, she found, the quality she had been hoping for without knowing she was hoping for it, and finding it was its own kind of information. He said at the end of the 40 minutes that he had a question and that he wanted to ask it here rather than in a letter, because he had learned that some things were not improved by being put in writing, and he thought this was one of them. She said he could ask. He said he had spent the past 3 weeks attending to everything she had been attending to before she left, and that the attending had been, in the practical sense, considerably more demanding than he had anticipated, and that in the process of attending he had found 17 things he had not known existed in his own household, not including the village school or the damp in the East Corridor, which he had also attended to, and that the finding of 17 things he had not known existed had produced a very specific kind of understanding that he did not have a graceful way of describing. She said he should describe it ungracefully then. He said that what it had produced was the understanding of what it meant to actually pay attention to a thing, and that paying attention to a thing was not the same as knowing it was there, and that for 19 months he had known she was there in the way he had known the East Corridor was there, which was that he moved through it every day and had not thought about it until the damp made itself impossible to ignore. She said she was listening. He said he was not asking her to come back to the house. He was asking whether she was willing to continue what had begun in this room this evening, which was a conversation between two people who were both actually present in it, and to allow that continuation to be what it was, which was not an arrangement and not a function and not a placeholder for something else, but simply the two of them attending to each other with the accurate understanding of what attending actually meant. She looked at him in the December firelight of the Fenwick drawing room, and she took the full measure of what she was looking at, which was a man who had spent 3 weeks doing the unglamorous work of understanding himself through the evidence of his own household, and who was standing in a room asking her something real in the ungraceful language of a man who is saying it because it is true rather than because it has been constructed to produce a particular response. She said she would continue. She said it simply and without conditions, because the conditions had been met. Not all of them, and not perfectly, but met in the way that honest attempts at difficult things meet the conditions they are working toward, which is imperfectly and with visible effort and in the direction of something that is genuinely being tried. He said he was glad. She said she knew. They remained at the window for some time after that, and the conversation moved, and the evening continued, and the room arranged itself around them with the comfortable unconsciousness of rooms that contain two people who have found a frequency, and Lord Fenwick observed it from across the room, and said nothing to either of them, and said something very quiet to his wife, who smiled in the way of a woman who has watched the right things happen in her drawing-room and finds the experience entirely satisfying. She had left a house on a Friday morning in November with one trunk and the full clarity of a woman who understood precisely what she was leaving and why. She had been at a window in December with the same clarity, directed now toward a different kind of understanding, which was that clarity was not the end of a story, but the beginning of one that had a chance of being honest. And honest was the only kind of story she had ever been interested in living. Not a comfortable story, not an arranged one, an honest one, built on the actual ground of two people who had finally, at some cost, arrived at the same place at the same time, and understood where they were. Leave a like if this story found you. It tells this channel that these stories deserve to be heard. Subscribe and turn on the bell so the next one reaches you from the very beginning, because they are always better experienced whole. And if you know someone who has been the most capable person in a room that refused to see them, share this with them today. Some stories are not just watched, they are recognized. And recognition, even when it comes late, is where everything real finally begins.